Hey guys, so we are going to be talking about energy flow in a system, which we already have kind of touched on a little bit. We're just going to get some more detail about this topic. And so this topic 4.2 is a brief look at how energy and nutrients are going to move through an ecosystem, and then also how we can quantify that energy movement. Before we begin, I just want you to pause the video and read and consider understandings 4.2.1 through 4.2.3. Please read those and then jot down in your paper an answer to this brainstorm question. How does energy enter ecosystems that don't have access to sunlight? So you can pause now. Alright, so like I said, some of this is review, and this topic definitely is a piece of that review. Light is the initial energy source in most communities. It is the way that energy enters an ecosystem, and it's very, very important. Photosynthesis is important, which we'll talk about in just a moment, but it allows it allows producers to convert inorganic molecules to organic molecules such as glucose that can then be passed on to consumers. Now, this isn't true of every ecosystem. Like we said before, there are some that do not have access to sunlight, and so those like very deep sea environments, that's basically the only kind that has zero access to sunlight. Those will be converting mostly sulfur compounds and harnessing the energy locked up in those compounds. Alright, so light energy is converted to chemical energy through the process of photosynthesis. Photosynthesis uses sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide to produce glucose and oxygen. So that's kind of the formula for photosynthesis. It is the only way in which inorganic compounds can be converted to organic food compounds. And so, like I said, producers in sunlight are the key to getting energy into an ecosystem, so they're very important. Carbon is cycled through this process in the form of carbon dioxide and then in the form of sugar as it undergoes photosynthesis here. And then that carbon is moved through the food chain from the producer to the primary consumer, and so on and so forth. So that carbon is just going to keep moving through the food chain until eventually it returns to the soil or is emitted as gases through respiration, and then it will just go through that cycle again. You will learn the carbon cycle in detail a little bit later in this topic. Okay. If it returns to the soil, that will be through the process of decay. And for this, keep in mind the function of decomposers such as saprotrophs and detritivores. And if you don't know what those are, please jot the names down, and you may need to go back into the last topic and review saprotrophs and detritivores. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at energy loss in an ecosystem. I'd like you to take a moment and read and consider understandings 4.2.4 to 4.2.7. And then, just like last time, take a moment to jot some ideas about what happens to energy consumed before it can be passed on to the next consumer. So please pause the video now. We are going to take a quantitative look at energy. We've already looked at pyramids of energy, which we'll actually see again here. But we're going to learn how to do the math of energy flow in an ecosystem. So there are a few terms that you need to know first. One is gross production, which is the total amount of organic matter produced. And I think sometimes it helps to think of the term gross production in terms of money. If you think of your gross income, this is, any income that is coming in at all. It's all the money coming in before you have to pay the bills or before you have to buy groceries or whatever else. So as with money, gross production is all of the energy, all of the organic matter that is being made available. Now, net production is the gross production minus respiration. And respiration is like the energy bills of an organism. It's the things that the organism needs to use that energy for. So if I eat a sandwich, a lot of the energy locked up in that sandwich is going to go to my heart beating, breathing, small muscle movements. Not to mention if I decide to go for a run or do something like that requires, a lot of energy. My brain functioning requires a lot of energy. So I took in all of this food, and that was the amount that was available. But now the amount that I have left to pass along is going to be the gross minus the amount that I actually used, so minus respiration. And then lastly, a term that you'll need to know is biomass. And this is the total weight of living organisms in a given area. And biomass, weighing or finding the volume or energy equivalent of organisms in an area, can tell you something about how much energy is available in that area. Alright, so we are going to put this knowledge to use. First of all, we're going to put it together in an equation. So we've got our net production equals gross production minus respiration. And what I would like you to do for this example is I'd like you to take a look at the information given and to calculate the net production by all of these different levels of organisms. So calculate net production by the primary, secondary, and tertiary consumers of Silver Springs. So please pause the video now to calculate. Once you've had a chance to calculate, please set those calculations aside and I will discuss them with you when you return to class. Or if you're watching in class, check in with me, or if you have a substitute teacher or something, they will have the answers for you. So double check your answers with them and discuss with your neighbor to be sure you're on the right track. If you got different answers, try to figure out what you were doing wrong. Okay, another piece of this topic is to review trophic level and review how food moves through food webs. So we've already talked about trophic level. Remember, it represents the number of transfers of energy. So a plant, for example, is at trophic level 1 because the energy has passed from the sun to the plant. So what I'd like you to do now is to make sure you fully understand that information, and I'd like you to determine the trophic level that the seabird occupies. So pause the video now to determine the seabird trophic level. Now again, after you've taken the time to determine this, check in with me or with the sub to make sure that you have determined the correct trophic level or levels. As we discussed before, as we move through the trophic levels, there are significant losses of energy at each level. As a result of respiration and tissues that are not consumed. So because organisms use the energy they consume, it's not available at the next level. In addition, because some tissues are indigestible, that energy becomes unusable as well. So because of this, we often observe about a 10% transfer of energy from one level to another, and this results in low numbers of our top species, and in general these would be our top predators. We often observe very small populations in these organisms because energy does become quite limited as you move through the trophic level ladder. In addition, I'd like you to make a note that often respiration, energy used in respiration, leaves the body as heat energy, and heat energy can usually not be converted to any other form within a living organism. So heat energy is eventually lost completely from the ecosystem as it leaves the ecosystem in the form of heat. Okay, now using the information from your gross production and net production calculations, I would like you to construct a pyramid of energy, and this is going to represent the net production from each organism, and that represents how much energy it actually has to pass on to the next trophic level. So use a half sheet of graph paper that I'll have available, or sketch this in your notebook, and I'd like you to construct a pyramid of energy for the producer, primary consumer, and primary consumer, secondary consumer, and tertiary consumer for this food chain. Be sure to include units in your pyramid of energy as well as a key, and label the producer, consumers. Pause the video now to complete that pyramid. The last thing we need to consider is the difference between energy flow in an ecosystem and nutrient flow in an ecosystem. Now, energy is constantly entering an ecosystem through the sun, through producers, etc., and it's constantly leaving as heat energy. So as you can see from this diagram, we've got the sunlight coming in, gets converted to chemical energy, and then leaves as heat. But nutrients are a totally different story. Nutrients do not enter and leave an ecosystem like energy does. In fact, nutrients are recycled indefinitely. There are very few natural methods that will add nutrients to a stable ecosystem. And so for nutrients, it's important that they are recycled through an ecosystem and always being made available to organisms through decomposition by saprotrophs, detritivores, etc. If nutrients for some reason are leaving an area, this can result in depleted soil that's not able to support as much diversity of life or as healthy of life. And so nutrient leaching and nutrient exit from an ecosystem is a really serious problem. In agriculture, we see this issue a lot because we grow organisms in the soil and then we cut them down and take them elsewhere. And so rather than those organisms dying, decomposing, and returning the nutrients to the soil, they are exported. And so in America, we have, in many places, a big issue with losing nutrients, which is why the use of fertilizers is so prevalent today, because we're trying to bolster those nutrients. So that can be a major issue. With the example of the rainforest that I shared, if nutrients are not being constantly added to that soil, it becomes very poor very quickly. So energy can come and go, but nutrients must be recycled, and that is key to a healthy ecosystem. Alright, that is it for topic 4.2. Keep in mind that we won't go over this in lecture format in class, so be sure that you write questions down and that you have taken good notes to study from for the quiz covering topic 4.2. Thanks.